Hello and welcome to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. I'm Catherine Tomlinson and I founded Oxford Clay, an eco-conscious pottery company. So on this podcast, we're going to be talking about all things pottery related, often with an eco-conscious twist, and I can't wait to share it with you. Let's go. Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Oxford Clay Pottery Podcast. And today we're going to be talking about what to do when your pot goes wrong. So, this has happened to me thousands of times, probably thousands of times now, but definitely hundreds of times. And I'm mainly talking about when you're making a pot on the wheel. But it could be that you could apply this to any pot or anything you're making in pottery. Okay, so let's start with when you're making a pot on the wheel and you're having one of those days where it seems like absolutely everything you touch goes wrong. So I have definitely had this, and especially when I went to evening classes, and it would seem like one week you could make something, you're like, yeah, I think I might be improving on the wheel, and then the next week literally everything you try and make goes wrong. And you end up with absolutely nothing, which is quite demoralizing, quite disappointing. But the first thing to say about this is that this is an essential part of growing your skills. So whilst it may seem like, you're kind of going backwards or something in your skill level, that's actually not what's happening. What's happening is you're at the very edge of your kind of, skills and experience, your growth edge. So although it feels like everything's going wrong, what's really happening is that you're maybe more confident and you're experimenting with like sort of pushing the clay in a different way, or trying something else out, and it didn't work out. But this kind of experimentation is really essential to kind of growing your pottery skills. So although it can feel really disappointing, it's actually really good. And basically the only way to grow your pottery skills is to kind of have, inverted commas, those failures where you've pushed the clay too far, or you've gone out, like your bowl is too wide, or you've overworked the clay on the wheel and it flops over. Like, this is the only way really to know how, like, the sort of boundaries of clay, and also the limitations of the clay you're working with, and also growing your skills basically with that particular clay. Okay, so let's move on to what you can do. So these are 5 things that I have actually done when my pot has gone wrong on the wheel, which, like I said to you, is like loads of times. So the first thing to say is that, so if you're making a pot on the wheel, and it's just like, say you accidentally knock it or something, or it's like you've accidentally gone through the bottom, you've gone too far, you sort of, or you make it too wide or something like that. It's a really good kind of time to experiment with, like, looking at, like, say, like how to push the limits of that particular clay. So you've got nothing to lose. Your pot is you don't necessarily maybe want the pot, but you can now really experiment with, like, really testing the limitations of that clay. So every time you make something, you'll be using clay which is maybe a slightly different wetness, or maybe you're making things with different types of clay. One week maybe an even cast you make it with earthenware, the next week you're making it with stoneware, and each time you use clay it will be different in terms of its limitations, in terms of how far you can push it, how much you can work with it before the pot like can't stand up structurally. So it's a really good way of kind of using that time to, when your pot's gone wrong, you can really, it's a real opportunity for like further experimentation. So, you could see like, oh, well, how wide can I make this pot? It's gone wrong, the side's like not quite right, but that's cool. I can just like make it really big, see how thin I can make a pot, or, see how far down I can make the base without it going through to the wheel, surface of the wheel. So that's the first thing to say. So number one thing is that you can experiment on your pot as you're making it if it goes wrong. Okay, so the second thing you can do with a pot that's gone wrong is you can use it to experiment with different textures. So I had a pottery teacher once who she was really good. It was like what she did was she used a fork, and she would have the wheel turning, and she would push the fork kind of into the clay, so it would do kind of like the four prongs of the fork, the lines around the side of the pot, and that was her way of like making texture on the pot. And then what she would do is she would open up the pot even further, and it would kind of split the lines and widen the lines in loads of different ways, and it was really exciting. Like you can make really cool textures that way. So you could use your pot if you're like, oh, I don't really like it. You could use it to try out making some different textures, like maybe whilst the wheel is moving, or you could cut the pot off, let it dry to leather hard, and you could experiment with, maybe pushing some shapes into it, or, carving some things out of it. So there's loads of different things you can do. You can score things into it, practice your writing on it. It's a great opportunity to like practice those things on a pot that the stakes are quite low. You're like, I don't really like this pot. So, it's not like your absolute favorite pot, like the best thing you've ever made that you want to, do an experiment on that one. Just experiment on this one that, you're like, well, I don't really like it. So experiment with texture. That's the second one. So the third thing you can do with a pot that goes wrong is you can actually keep it, but you can make the thing that you think has gone wrong with it into like a feature, like a proper feature of the pot. So I've had loads of times when I've been making a pot and I've slightly knocked the rim of the pot, and then you get this thing where that later on it's going to be prone to warping. So you think, oh no, I've knocked the rim, and now it forevermore it's going to warp, especially kind of later on down the line, like the glaze wiring. So this is a great opportunity to experiment with shape. You could make the whole rim of the pot wiggly. So if you've accidentally knocked one side, you can make the other side, knock the other side in, or, make one side go out and another side go in, and sort of you've got like a wiggly flower shape sort of thing. So I've seen professional potters do this with their work, kind of like, make kind of wiggly rims basically. And it does look so beautiful, especially with, those really beautiful clay, like say like a porcelain or something, or if your pot is very thin, it will look really, really beautiful. So that's another option. Make the thing you think has gone wrong into a feature of the pot. Okay, so the fourth thing you can do with a pot that's gone wrong, I'm using wrong in inverted commas because, as we know, nothing is wrong in pottery. It's all experimentation, it's all creativity, it's all brilliant, okay? But what the fourth thing you can do, if you really don't like your pot, you're like, oh, it's horrible, I want to get rid of it. A really good thing to do is you can use it for glaze testing. So if you're thinking about maybe potentially making your own glaze, or there's the opportunity to like try, different glazes in the pottery studio you're working in, layering different glazes up, you might want to make some glaze tests. And the really good thing about using a pot that you've made on the wheel for glaze tests is that you'll get a vertical surface. So what you can do essentially is cut your pot off the wheel, even though, you're like, well, it's gone wrong, I don't like it. But you can chop the pot up into sections where you get a vertical section and then you still have a base section. And that will mean that your pot, your glaze test will be, a bit that's kind of vertical and then a kind of stand, which is like part of the base of the pot. And that will allow you to, you can dip the top part in the glaze, and then it will allow you to see how your glaze copes with being fired on a vertical surface. And that is really good to know, because you want a glaze that, like, doesn't run too much. If it runs right down to the kiln shelf, you don't want that. So it's really, really, really great to have the opportunity to test a glaze vertically. Like, sometimes when you mix different glazes together, they can sort of have an effect on each other, where one will be made more runny. And so it's really, really good to test glazes this way with a vertical surface. So that is, I would really recommend that. And what I do actually is, when pots go wrong, I kind of, I can cut them up and make these glaze tests with the vertical and the base. And then I just fire them in a bisque firing with all the other stuff. And then I just have a collection of them, basically. So it means that if I ever want to test a very tiny glaze test, then I have all these sort of like little tester tiles ready to go, basically. So it's really cool to have them kind of ready for any glaze tests that you want to make. So yeah, I definitely recommend that. So that's number 4 of what you can do with a pot that's gone wrong. Okay, and then number 5 is, lastly, you can recycle your pot. So obviously this is not after the pot has been bisque fired, where its molecular structure changes and you can't recycle it back into clay. But if you haven't fired it, if it's just like wet clay still, or it's leather hard clay, or it's greenware, so if it's dry clay, you can recycle it back into clay. So, the pottery studio you might be working in will probably have a clay reclaiming bin with loads of people's stuff in that they don't want, just kind of like melting or slaking down. That's what the word for when clay dissolves sort of back into its like sort of soppy slip state. So yeah, there'll probably be a bin. You can just like put it in there, and that means the person who's the technician in your pottery studio, or you yourself, can reclaim the clay. So it's never wasted. You can always recycle your pot if you don't like it. Yeah, so those are the 5 things that I've done with pots that have gone wrong. And it's really important just to say, like, even though it is really disappointing when things go wrong, inverted commas, it's not as disappointing as you might think it is. It's actually really positive, and it actually means that you're finding out the limits of your own, you're really growing your skills, you're finding out the limits of the clay you're using, and you're really at a growth edge for your pottery skills. So, and it's only through those periods that you get like better, whatever better means, sort of thing. But in terms of like your vision is matched up with what your hands and mind can do, basically. So it's only through those experiences that you will get further towards that, basically. Okay, so let's cover the top 5 things you can do when your pot goes wrong. So the first thing is just like experiment on the pot. Say you've knocked the side or something like that, you can just like test the limitations of that clay. How far can you go down? How far can you go out? Can you just, see how thin you can get it on the wheel? So it's a great opportunity just to kind of like experiment with that pot on the wheel, and that will give you so much information in terms of like, your next attempt, basically, at making a pot. The second thing you can do is practice mark making, in texture. So you can either do this whilst it's still on the wheel, scoring things into it. You can practice sort of maybe scoring the bottom as if you were going to like cut the pot off. How much can you take away of the bottom? You can practice like mark making. So when it's leather hard, so you can cut it off and then use it for like, decoration, experimentation after that. So that's a really good thing you can use it for. Or number 3 is you could make a feature out of the thing that you don't like, that's gone wrong. Say like, for example, one of the sides has flopped. You can maybe push the other sides to make a kind of wiggly rimmed pot. So all is not lost, and you can still make something really beautiful, even if it wasn't how you originally intended in your mind. Okay, the 4th thing is you can cut it up so into like kind of vertical pieces with a bit of the base for glaze testing, and they are really good because you can test the glaze, vertically. Or you can just reclaim the whole thing and recycle the whole pot back into, original clay. So either you can do that yourself, or you can just put it in the reclaiming bin of your pottery studio. So I hope that's been helpful, and you are not alone if everything you touch goes wrong. That's happened to everybody, including me, loads of times, which is so frustrating when you're at an evening class or something. You think, I've only got 2 hours left and nothing I'm doing is working. But it's all really positive for your skills, like I said. So thank you so much for joining me on this episode, and I'm really looking forward to seeing you on the next one, and happy potting.